thing after, of course.
Yeah, it finally decided to start recording, but yeah, all good. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Discovery Debrief, a podcast setting a course to discuss the future of the final frontier in Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Lower Decks, and more. I'm co-host Chris Clow, and I'm joined by two members of our bold panel of Star Trek franchise explorers, including Rachael Clow.
Hello.
And Cicero Holmes.
Let's get this going. Your references are good.
Oh man, he was frightening. Well, as you can probably tell, it's been a while since we released an episode discussion, so we're actually going to be doubling up to discuss episodes. Oh my God, is it three and four, or 4 and 5? It's 4 and 5.
4 and 5.
Yeah. Thank you. Episodes 4 and 5 of Star Trek Picard Season 1, Absolute Candor, and Stardust City Rag. But first, let's check in with our panelists as usual. And I do also have to say, I mean, unfortunately, Zachy couldn't be with us, but 50 episodes.
Yes.
How about
Congratulations. That? Yes, it is. It's apropos that it is a double-size episode because it is the 50th. You know, everybody here being such big comic fans. You know, so yeah, I think this is it's perfect. It couldn't have worked out better.
5-0, Rachael.
Well, the only thing that's missing is Zachy.
Yeah, true. And he was very sad that he couldn't be with us for our 50th episode, but he's a very busy man. So we had to get these ones out though, because 2 episodes behind. So we got to keep soldiering on as much as it pains all of us to soldier on without Zachy. But there's quite a lot to discuss in these either way. But before we get to the episode discussion, Cicero, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I have mostly recovered. I'm about at 97% from the phage, and I am still engaging with Trek via Deep Space Nine.
Right.
So I am almost done, and I'm trying to maybe slow it down a little so I don't finish it. But so I am so the last 7-8 episodes, maybe roughly 10 episodes of the series are multi-parters. They're all one connected series of events. Yeah. So I'm in the second part of those Till Death Do Us Part, episode 18.
Wow, so you're right at the end.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the journey. So what did you make of unfortunately we lost Jadzia there at the end of season 6.
Yes.
Spoiler alert.
Right, exactly. Spoilers.
Wow, Chris.
Right. Put that spoiler klaxon on at 30 minutes for that moment. It's one thing. I think I'm more at peace with it today than I would have been if I had been watching the series live or close to live. And the reason being is I understood why it happened as a result of the incredible documentary What We Left Behind, where they talked about, it's just goofy disputes with predatory producers that create some of that drama that happens behind the scenes. But it was really kind of inexplicable how it happened on the show. They did their best to present a a, a valid narrative reason for it, but it didn't really make sense. But once once you got over, once you knew that the reason that it happened was because of backstage politics, and this wasn't necessarily a narrative, right, exactly, a creative decision in the writers' room where they were, this was what they planned to do with the character. It made it a little bit more palatable because it just didn't make a lot of sense in the moment. And then to immediately bring the character back through Ezri, and there's nothing wrong with Ezri as a character, but it was just like, but yeah, like I'm happy Dax is still there, but Ezri Dax is not necessarily Jadzia.
This is interesting because so this brings back memories for me, because I went through DS9, as I've told people on this show before, embarrassingly late, because I didn't get to it until around 2011, 2012. Right. And Rachel was right on my heels. She finished it, I think, about a year after I did, probably.
Yeah.
And we were over at where I lived at the time, and I guess you were looking at Memory Alpha, or you were reading something on your phone about Dax. And I just hear a question. I was in another room, and I hear a question ring out from the living room. Who's Ezri Dax? And I just kind of went,
I had a bad feeling when I read that.
But Rachel, you were probably still are rather attached to Jadzia. So I know that was a moment that you were dreading, but then something remarkable happened where you really became attached to Ezri.
Yeah, no, I like them both, so I'm happy either way.
But you seem to really gravitate toward Ezri.
Yeah, no, she gets space sick.
Right.
Right. I guess I related to her because she seemed like she was kind of like nervous about being in space but she was still like a good Starfleet officer. And so like I just like that what they did with her character, and they made her so much different than Jadzia, know.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't feel like they were just like replacing Jadzia. It felt like they were like going forward with the Dax character. And so I ended up really liking what they did with it, and really liking Ezri as a character, and wishing maybe we had a little bit more, time to hang out with her. But
yeah. Well, in any event, Cicero, it sounds like you're not crazy about Ezri.
No. Oh, no, not at all. And if that is the case, I don't want to, I don't want that to be the case at all. I feel like Rachel, hashtag Rachel is right. I love, there's nothing wrong with Ezri. But the thing that I'm saying is I'm lamenting the loss of Jadzia.
Sure.
Because here's a character that was fully realized at this point over the course of 6 years. And, not only that, but Worf finally got his partner.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, and it was just starting to be able to blossom and bloom in a way that made sense on the show. And then it was ripped apart. And like, so I feel for Jadzia, I feel for Worf, because that like there were new avenues and new things to explore with his character that we're not, we'll never see. And Jadzia was a great character. Now Ezri is a fantastic character. As Rachel said, she is a great Starfleet officer, but she is not a soldier, which is something that we haven't really seen. We saw it obviously in Deanna Troi, but like she wasn't even really. Well, I guess she became a Starfleet officer, but like it wasn't. No one ever assumed that she was a soldier.
Sure.
And this is the first one, especially on DS9. This is the first character that is an officer that's not a soldier, in that way, in the midst of a war. Yeah. So watching that dynamic and the Ezri character is really great. We get to meet her mom. Like all of that stuff is, we didn't get any of that stuff from Jadzia. So that was great to be able to see, some more of the family dynamics of the Trill once someone has been joined.
And they certainly decided, and I haven't really read a whole lot, but from what I understand, the expanded universe took Ezri and ran with her up to and including Starship Command.
Oh, wow.
Captain Dax. So I think what the EU decided to do with her is that she did come into her own in such a way that she serves as sort of the pinnacle, taking the best from all of her experiences granted to her by the symbiote, and just becomes an ultimate commander, basically.
Sure.
So it's kind of an interesting approach that they decided to take with her. But either way, while I'm sad that your journey in DS9 is coming to an end, I am very glad that you've got the majority of the series under your belt, and now you can complain right along with Zachy and I about where the hell was the Enterprise at Worf's wedding? And when Worf went back to the Enterprise, why the hell didn't they say, "I'm sorry, your wife is dead"?
Right.
Just some things that stick out in the head about that. But so I assume then after you finish Deep Space Nine, are you going to roll right into TNG from the beginning, or what's the plan?
You know it. Right. Listen, this is a 7 series mission, and I have only gotten through 3 of them. So it's a 6 series mission, but I've only gotten through 3 of them. So
after TNG, then are you going to watch the animated series, or are you going to straight to TOS?
No, so I am going to watch the animated series again. So I've already watched all of the animated series, and I love it because it is terrible, and it just oh man, it just makes me smile with glee because the animation is so bad, but it's more Star Trek stories, and that's what it's all about. It's worth it, and it's the cast, right? Like it is the actual cast. So
there's a couple of gems in there.
There are, but most of them are really bad.
They get a little weird. We'll have to, if we ever do a TAS episode, we'll have to invite Kyle Sullivan back to talk about it, because I know that he's a big fan.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's move right along. So we got 2 episodes to talk about. So let's begin with what.
You're not going to ask me what I'm up to.
No, I took so long.
I'm not up to anything. Don't worry about it.
You don't normally say too much when I go to you. You're just like, I don't know, what have I been up to?
Yeah, you to remember. I don't know.
Pretty accurate.
And I mean, plus Cicero's watching DS9.
Yeah, I know. We're not watching anything, so
not really, except Star Trek reruns. But let's start with Star Trek Picard episode 4, called Absolute Candor. So, Picard asked Captain Rios to make a detour to the planet Vashti, where he helped relocate Romulan refugees before the attack on Mars took place. He goes to the temple of the Kawat Malat, warrior nuns who took in a boy named Elnor, another Romulan refugee, whom Picard grew close to. And Elnor has become a rather devout member of the Kawat Malat in all facets, including what their belief system is, as well as in combat. He's virtually unmatched, they say. So Picard goes and asks Elnor as an adult to join him on his quest, and Elnor initially refuses, but changes his mind when Picard is attacked by Romulans who resent Starfleet for abandoning the evacuation effort of Romulan refugees. So Picard and Elnor beam up to the La Sirena, where Captain Rios and Raffi Musiker are fighting a battle with a local warlord. A strange ship helps the La Sirena win the battle, but is damaged in the process, forcing the pilot to be beamed over to the La Sirena. And who is it but 7 of 9? Meanwhile, aboard the Borg artifact, Soji is trying to find out more about the Romulan ship that was assimilated by the cube and about the destroyer that the Romulan patients called her in the last episode. Narek offers to get her information on the ship, but they have a falling out when he expresses doubt about her past. Rizzo tells Narek that he has a week to get the location of the other synthetics from Soji before she switches to her own methods. So this one, I thought that it was particularly interesting just because it gives a little bit more context to the scale of the loss of the Romulan system and the Romulan people. Cicero, just kind of what was your overall impression of episode 4 after everything that happened? And as the person who has watched Voyager most recently, how about that 7?
So, man, the A story in this episode was a 10 for me. And the B story was a like 4.5, 5, maybe 6.
Ooh. Whoa.
And it's so the A story, like learning about the Romulans and the level of betrayal that they felt as a result of Jean-Luc Picard and the Federation abandoning them. Was so palpable. And then the feeling of helplessness that Picard felt because, faced with the fact that in spite of what he knows, in spite of his best efforts, the facts are that he promised to help these people and he didn't. So it doesn't matter whether or not the excuse is valid for why he didn't or couldn't. As far as they're concerned, he failed them, and he realizes that is also a truth, and he had to live with that. And that was like, you felt that. That was great. And Elnor is awesome. I love that dude. The B story, while, I'm all about Soji, learning who she is, this romance that isn't between her and whatever his name is. I don't even care. Oh man, it's so bad. It's so bad. And then his sister, who keeps coming on to him like that, it's not a thing that we're making up. That is definitely how they're playing it. Who knows why they're doing it that way? I don't know. Like all of that is just like whoever made that decision, or at least I hope it pays off. I hope there is a reason that this played the way that it did. Otherwise, like, what were they thinking?
It's see, here's where I don't know if I'm rationalizing it or if it's just genuinely not great. I just kind of wonder if there's like a portion of a cultural aspect that we're not picking up yet, or if it's just
you're trying to rationalize it.
I mean,
it's just their culture.
Look, I'm not going to say that it because we've seen Romulans that have been, I guess, pretty sensual in their overarching demeanor before.
Right.
I mean, it's not uncommon to see Romulans behave that way, especially when they're trying to manipulate somebody. I mean, case in point, the Enterprise incident in the original series, you had the Romulan commander, and Spock got very close in that episode, and she it might have been more genuine on her side, but she was still trying to employ a seductive tactic to sort of bring Spock into her corner. But these are siblings,
right,
in this show.
right.
And maybe that's just, they must just be trying to creep us out. I don't know. What do you think, Rachel?
I mean, I think it's just like villain code, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, incest equals villainy, makes us not like them. There's like, we have no other reason to not trust them other than their general creepiness.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I agree with Cicero. I think that B story was, I don't know if I would call it bad. It was just boring. It was like kind of more of the same, I thought. It was just like, okay, like,
things do not seem to be progressing at a very steady clip when it comes to Soji's side of the equation.
Right, yeah. And I think that they just kind of need to remind us what's going on there so that, because whatever plot is going to happen with her needs some other component to catch up with it, and they need to remind us that she exists. And obviously there was nothing for her in the next episode. So yeah, it was just a whole lot of nothing, I thought.
And what about Picard on the planet where the Kawat Malat are?
Oh, I like that. That was great. Yeah. I mean, I agree with everything Cicero said, that you feel Picard's regrets and in the weight of his choices and the actual human consequences of what happened. And
relatively speaking.
Yeah. Well, humanoid.
Yeah.
Humanoid consequences. And Elnor, I think, is a good character, and with the context of the next episode as well, like I really like what he brings to things.
Well, I mean, he brings the absolute candor, right?
Right.
It's very,
yeah.
I thought that was an interesting cultural aspect to apply to it, because there is something that is undoubtedly refreshing about a complete lack of pretense. And the idea that part of me wonders if part of the inspiration for that might stem from the Kawat Malat having very sort of ancient Romulan roots, because if they're ancient Romulan roots, then they're basically Vulcan roots.
They have like a common ancestry to led to Vulcan.
So if it's not logic, then it's candor. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if they're necessarily descended from the same kind of process necessarily, but it seems like there is sort of that rigid devotion to a lack of pretense that is similar to logic, but still permissive of emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. But either way, this one for me, it was... So the pacing of the show so far seems very, at least up to this point, and you had mentioned it, so I'm kind of taking your idea, Rachel, but it is kind of anti-Discovery in the sense that it moves far more methodically. And in this episode, it kind of slows things down a little too much from my perspective. Like you guys, I do like the A plot a lot more than I'm enjoying the B plot. Was it in this episode where they decided to skid across the floor of the Borg?
Yes. Oh my God! Please don't remind me.
I blocked that out. God.
I mean, I look. In a certain context, I could see that as being cute, maybe, but Narek does not come across as the kind of guy. Yeah. Although, hey, people on Twitter seem to call him the hot Romulan, which is fine for
people
that.
People on Twitter are thirsty for anything.
Right.
I mean, they are very heavy-handedly setting up the babyface turn for him.
Okay. So that's a good thing, Cicero. I'm glad that you brought that up, because we obviously know of something that happens in the next episode. That's where you think this is going for him.
Right. Yes.
How tell me some of your logic in terms of how you think it's sort of laying the seeds for that.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty blatant and heavy-handed. Like, what's his sister's name now?
Rizzo.
Rizzo, right? Yeah. So
not from Greece,
right?
This
Right. Exactly. Right. I mean, she's twice already said, "Don't fall in love with her." You know, and has alluded to him being seduced into, like, you know, he's the weak-minded one. You know, even though he's pretty, he doesn't have the resolve that she does. And therefore he is more likely to succumb to, you know, letting his cover story become his real story. And we already see, like, this goofy love story slide. Like, who does that? Like, you know, like,
the thing that it reminded me of was, have you ever seen The In-Betweeners?
No,
It's
no black people in it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But it's like a British comedy show.
Sure.
And it's like a raunchy comedy, like a teen comedy.
Sure.
And there's one episode where the main character, it looks like he's about to make it with a girl at a it's like a trailer park, but they call it a caravan club. And he's nervous, and he just like, let's fall into each other's arms. Did you ever skid as a child? Let's skid together. And so he takes off his shoes and slides across the floor, very much like.
And then some children take his shoes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
but I could not get past that. Like,
yeah, because we had just watched that. So
that's
so the imagery was
like,
was rather stark in our minds. But so I guess another question that I have for you, Cicero, is that, you know, now that you've absorbed so much of DS9,
right,
you've seen a fair amount of Romulans at the height of their power.
Yes.
Does any of what you're seeing from the Romulans in the Dominion War inform what you're seeing here?
It definitely speaks to the duplicitous nature of the Romulans. Coming directly off of DS9, it leads me to believe to never trust a Romulan, period.
And yet you still kind of might trust Narek in the future?
Yes, exactly. So, right. And so what the reason that this gets muddied for me is because we've now seen that the Romulans they were put in a situation that made them, at the very least, empathetic. And, you know, the fact that they lost their homes, you know, they lost their homes, and the Vulcans lost their home. So, you know, like you're seeing both of these species that are tangentially or directly related, at least, you know, historically. And you can have empathy for their plight. And as a result, they become, for lack of a better word, more human, more real, more relatable to you. And so in a lot of ways, PICARD very quickly put a real face on the Romulans and made them more than just villains, made them a more fleshed out race. And so you can see, like, even if they don't necessarily jive with the way we do things, or will do things in the way that we'll do things, they're not evil per se. They may do things that are, you know, a little conniving or what have you, but they're not necessarily evil. And they've got their own society, they've got their own culture, and that needs to be respected. And prior to this, they've been played as villains. Even the the Romulan who came and was when Kira became a colonel and was working while the few episodes that Cisco was gone, and was back on Earth. There was a Romulan commander that came, and she seemed great, and Kira was getting along fine with her, and it turns out she was doing something duplicitous.
Yeah.
So like, but now I can look at that Romulan and say, okay, well, that Romulan was duplicitous, but not all of them are.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things too is that there is a clear divide that the show is presenting in the Romulan culture between sort of the upper political class and an entity like the Qowat Milat.
Right. Right.
Nuances of culture in alien races have not always been Star Trek's strong suit, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, Ferengi worship money, etc. But I like this. I like that it's sort of showing the nuances of a people, because it's something that we sometimes forget in our own world, right? I mean, if we can criticize the response of the Chinese state to the coronavirus and lament that it seems to be a really oppressive political regime, but there are people in that country who don't like the way that they are governed, and we need to not lose sight of that, and it's the same kind of nuances that Star Trek at its best highlights. But it doesn't always do that through the alien races, and I like taking a closer look at the Romulans like this. I've never personally seen Romulans as evil as much as extraordinarily self-interested and extremely secretive.
Sure.
And I like that we're starting to see some of the other nuances, like the even the confrontation that Picard had near the end of the episode with the villagers outside of the Qowat Milat compound, I guess you could say. You understand where they're coming from, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think of the way that he sort of handled that interaction? Because he was trying to be Picard, right? He was trying to sort of extend an olive branch. What did you make of that, Rachel?
Yeah, it was fine. I'm trying to remember it, Chris. It was a while ago.
Romulan lives matter. So
yeah, I guess it was. I think that it was empathetic towards the Romulans, right? Like you get why they're so upset.
Mm-hmm.
Like this thing happened, and I get why they would blame Picard for not trying hard enough to continue to save them.
Mm-hmm.
And him saying, I tried my best, I did the best that I could, I mean, doesn't really cut it, right? When your planet got exploded.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's empathetic. It's not like those Romulans were shifty, duplicitous, playing both sides or something. They're just desperate, right?
They put their trust in the hands of an entity that said that they were going to be saved.
Yeah.
And then they weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something that that comes to my mind, and Cicero, I don't know if you plan on reading it, but I started reading The Last Best Hope, which is the Picard tie-in novel. And the opening of it starts off with the then Commander-in-Chief of Starfleet Command basically trying to recruit Picard for the rescue operation. And so we get to see when Command finds out about the supernova and how many lives it's going to affect and what planets the Romulan Empire is going to let them go to evacuate people. And Picard has this really reflective moment where he's looking out of the massive window of the Commander-in-Chief's office over the expanse of Starfleet headquarters, and he says that it's beautiful, it's breathtaking, it's like an impregnable fortress. that has never been breached. And just says, I can't imagine what it would be like for all of this to just be gone. It's almost inconceivable, and it would be terrible. And it kind of just put it in perspective. The idea of losing a planet is so monumental, and it just helps to try and kind of potentially think of it in those terms. But then, after that confrontation that he has, that's when Elnor shows up, and I love the way that Elnor was characterized, because as soon as he basically decides to help Picard, he tells the former Romulan senator, choose to live.
Right.
Such an implicit threat of utter devastation. And of course, he does not choose to live. And at the end, after he loses his head, Elnor says, I regret your choice.
Yeah.
It's just such
what an introduction to the show and to the fans, and what a way to do it. And everything about it was spectacular. Like the quote, the stance, the performance, but then the like acrobatic move, and 3 seconds later it was over. About that, everything about that was just fantastic.
Yeah, it wasn't a drawn out action scene, and this show does not really rely on them, although the next episode gives it a run for its money. But that was just a really effective way to introduce him and acquaint you rather quickly with the skill that he brings to the table in that respect. Yeah. Because Picard's not going to be able to do that, nor was he ever able to do that, at least that we saw. I mean, the last really best major fight that we saw him get in, he ended up with a knife through his back.
Right.
But it makes sense to me that someone of Elnor's skill set would be a part of this crew, and the fact that his demeanor is what it is just makes him all the more interesting, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah?
Yes, agree.
All right. Well, before we move on to the next episode, we knew that it was coming, but it's still quite a different experience to actually see it happen. Rachel, the return at the very last moment of the episode of 7 of 9.
I didn't see it coming. I mean, I knew that 7 of 9 was coming, but I didn't know she was going to be in the ship.
You didn't know that was when she was going to show up. Yeah, neither did I.
Like, there she was, and I was like, oh, cool.
What did you make of that in the moment? Because we got a brief, I mean, she only said one line before she collapsed, of course. But was that moment rewarding? Did it have the intended effect for you?
Yeah. Because I think I was just supposed to be like, yeah. And then, excited for next week, which
you were.
Yeah, I was.
Cicero, the return of 7 in that moment. Of course, we'll have a lot more to say about her in a second, but what was that experience like for you?
Well, I kind of knew it was her in the ship because we were running out of time, and in the opening credits, right after they have the main cast, the next credit is special guest Jerry Ryan. So because we hadn't seen her in the episode up until that point, I knew it must have been 7 of 9. Also, the other thing that kept happening was use of pronouns are very deliberate nowadays. Mm-hmm. And they continue to reiterate, oh, he's a good pilot. His ship's about to explode. And Picard says, get him out of there. So obviously it wasn't going to be a him. Like that part again, was like, all right, I know it's 7, but it was still very cool. I still popped for it. I'm sorry, using a lot of wrestling terms for my feelings on this show. So I still got up for it. I was still excited, and it definitely whet my appetite for the next episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very true. Well, before we move on to the next one, I wanted to go to the Memory Alpha page of Absolute Candor and go to the continuity section because there's a couple of interesting points here. This is the first episode of a main Star Trek series not to feature any uniformed Starfleet officers.
Wow.
That's kind of interesting, I thought. While the scenes on Vashti, Picard is still a commissioned officer since that's a flashback, and he wears his comm badge, but he's still dressed in casual attire. So, kind of an interesting twist.
Yeah.
This episode confirms that the evacuation of Romulan citizens by Starfleet was already underway when the attack on Mars occurred. So that might reinforce why the Romulans are pissed off, frankly, because the evacuation already started, and then it just kind of stopped. So it's implied that the Federation stopped supporting the established Romulan refugees when Starfleet discontinued its efforts to relocate any more citizens of Romulus. I think that is an implication that comes from seeing the relative tranquility of the planet before, and then when Picard returns there, obviously it's not in great shape. Following his impromptu resignation, Picard not only cut his ties with Starfleet, but also broke his promise to support Romulan refugee groups, such as those led by the Qowat Malat. This adds to the notion that Picard was only nursing his offended dignity in the years since his resignation, as he first observed in Remembrance. Yeah. So, kind of interesting. Elnor mentions Data's pet cat, Spot, though he admits he's never actually seen a cat. It's nice to have Spot given some service.
Spot representation.
Right.
Exactly. And we got to see a Romulan bird of prey from the 23rd century, very clearly a TOS design, which I appreciated, of course. And we also found out that Vashti is in the Beta Quadrant. And that's actually, I think the last episode, or maybe it was one of the other ones from Picard, pretty much established what the expanded universe kind of already did, that Romulus is in the Beta Quadrant, kind of on the border with the Alpha Quadrant. So
Right.
Kind of interesting. But let's move along to the next.
Before we move along, I have an existential question to ask the two of you, if I may.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I was thinking about it as we were talking about this episode, and you know, one of the things that I love about you both, the Clows, there are many things, but one of the things is how you both enjoy putting Star Trek on in the background. That it becomes background noise. It's the warm, the comfy spot on the couch for you guys as you're doing other things, as you're progressing through life. Would you wind up putting an episode of Picard on the same way you'd watch an episode of Voyager? Would you put an episode of Discovery on the same way you would put an episode of TNG on randomly? You know, like, what is the rewatchability of, like, the random rewatchability of these series so far for you guys?
No, I don't think I would do that, because I think that when TV was designed for 24 episode seasons that were going to go into syndication,
Sure,
that there was a certain way of making TV that really lends itself to being on in the background of things.
Like the procedural nature of
those
shows, right?
Yeah, procedural nature, and it's hard for me to put my finger on, but the fact that there are pure throwaway episodes, bottle episodes that were made to fill space and save money,
Right.
And those are, really good to have on in the background, and I just don't think. I would not put Discovery or Picard on in the background as it is now. Maybe after I've seen them 30 times, I'll feel differently. But as it is now, but I would not put any show made in the last 5 years on in the background. I don't think. I can't think of one that I would I would be able to, like, I wouldn't be like, I'm gonna, work on writing my thesis with Westworld on in the background. This is just not gonna happen because they're more like 10-hour movies.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't think that that's any knock at the shows themselves. It's just, I think that like the entity of television has changed significantly.
Chris, go ahead.
I'm a little bit different in that I have put Discovery on in the background.
Oh, okay.
I think that, I agree with Rachel partially because I think part of that ability, or I guess ease of putting a show on in the background, is the familiarity, which can only come from repeat viewings.
Right.
Like I'm reasonably comfortable putting on episodes of TNG DS9 Enterprise on in the background because I've seen them a lot. With Discovery, I find that I might be able to acclimate more to them by also having them on in the background. And I watched the first season of Discovery pretty closely, probably more closely than I watched the second season. In that I repeatedly watched every episode as opposed to sort of my single absorption of the episodes in season 2. But no, I've had the first couple of Mirror Universe episodes of Discovery on in the background because it was starting to become that kind of well-trodden ground. But I don't disagree with the structure being less permitting in the modern shows compared to the ones that came before.
Sure. Sure. All right. Well, yeah, thanks, man.
Perhaps time will tell.
Yeah, it certainly will. But we're going to have to watch for language because we got a daughter coming.
Hey,
she's going to hear it from you, Chris.
Exactly. Language is language. It evolves.
I was trying to shine spark in Metroid Zero Mission the other night, and I was cursing up a storm because I don't quite have the hang of it yet.
Oh, so yes, you know what? Before we move on to the next episode, speaking of language, holy crap. That is a thing that we've kind of glossed over. Episode, maybe you guys don't remember, but episode 4 was very, very, for Star Trek, very vulgar. And I've already kind of posted my objection to the use of scatology in the 24th century. They've definitely kind of doubled down on that, at least in that 4th episode. And it really, it's very disappointing to me that they not only are they cursing, well, obviously they're cursing in a way that makes sense to us, like as opposed to the way BSG did it. They were vulgar as well, but they said, they created their own curse words. So, so that way that made sense for their language. The fact that 400 years 400 years after I die, people are still using the same curse words that I used to great effect.
You're disappointed with the progress of humanity.
Yeah. That's disappointing to me. And the fact is that they're like the writers are doing it for effect is just like, now they mean business because they just use this antiquated word of curse. Man, I'm very, very against it.
Well, here's where I think I differ from you on it.
Okay.
We have not heard the Admiral himself use anything, which I think can kind of be retroactively applied to every other instance in which we've seen him. I don't think he likes it. And that's probably why we didn't hear it when he was on the Enterprise. Well, he didn't like it other than
they were on broadcast television, which is why he didn't hear it.
Well, no. I think there's room for that kind of an assumption.
Right.
Yes,
sure.
absolutely admitting that is a headcanon thing, that's an assumption on my part. But because he has not elected to do it, and he set the tone for his ship, that's, I guess, why we didn't hear it very much.
I will also say that linguistically, swear words, curse words are unusually persistent in languages.
Right.
That like they tend to not change as quickly as other forms of language.
Yes.
So maybe they'll still be using it. Probably not with the same grammatical construction, because that changes quite a bit.
Yes.
But I know that if you start looking up the etymology of curse words, they're very old.
yeah. I mean, like, as it stands, the F word, fornicate, is already like 300 or 400 years old. Like,
but I see where you're coming from. I mean,
the ways in which we use it are
very different.
Different.
Yeah, it's an extraordinarily versatile.
Right.
But just in terms of this franchise, I see where you're coming from, Cicero. I mean, is it a trend that I'm happy about? Not really. I don't think I feel as strongly about it, but it's not necessarily something that I'm. Oh, it's about time they said that. I'm not.
Finally.
Right. Yeah. That's not my point of view. But also the sort of society that we're kind of seeing, or at least the portion of the society that we're seeing in this show, makes it a little bit more permissible in my mind.
Sure.
It's getting outside of the Starfleet culture, even though we heard the commander-in-chief drop an F-bomb early on.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the Picard's the Last Best Hope book, we get a rather vulgar exclamation from someone who's believed to be the president of the Federation.
Sure.
But no, I mean, I'm not thrilled about it, but I guess just contextually,
it says more about our culture than I think it does about anything on the show.
Right. Yeah.
More acceptable.
Yeah. And we only really saw language come out in Discovery from one time from a very excited group of officers that made a really interesting discovery.
Again, which at that point, the use made so much sense there. I was totally okay with that, and I thought that, like, if you're gonna do it, if you're going to break barriers, that is the way in this show, with that, using that type of language. That's the way to do it. And the fact that they're doing it here is, and the way they're choosing it is so, it's very off-putting to me. The irony is that there may be some people listening to this show who have come from the video game Apocalypse show, which aired actually today as we're recording. So if you are here, thank you very much. But during that show, I involved myself with scatology very, very thoroughly. I bathed in it like a cheap cologne. So to hear me clutch my pearls when I talk about it. Right.
Wait a second. Consistent.
Right.
Well, but I mean, hey, look, I get where you're coming from, and there are people who are using the presence of vulgarities in modern Star Trek as something to tear the modern iteration of the franchise down. I don't think that that's a really reasonable critique to level at the destruction of Star Trek because they say dirty words. No, that's not going to fly, I don't think. But that's just me. All right, well, let's move along to episode 5 of Star Trek Picard Season 1, Stardust City Rag. in a flashback, and I have to prepare myself even just for reading this because as soon. What are you laughing at? What's so funny? When we watched this last night, we're recording this on Friday night. Last night, you saw how I reacted to this.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I just go on. I'll explain my problems later.
Okay. This shocked the hell out of me. Because like it's not necessarily in a bad way. I'm not saying that every single character that we got to know and love in other Star Trek shows should always be living a happy ending necessarily. But this did shock me. So in a flashback, 7 of 9 comes upon a black marketeer named Bjayzl, who forcibly harvests Borg implants from former drones to the point of torture. And it's kind of horrifying. And that's not the thing that shocked me. The thing that shocked me, as people who have seen the episode know, is that we find out pretty quickly that the person that Bjayzl is forcibly extracting implants from, even taking his goddamn eyeball out, is Icheb, a character who came into Voyager relatively late in the game. He was basically a child who was assimilated by the collective, an older child, like a mid to late teenager, but was taken in by the Voyager crew and kind of became a surrogate son to 7 of 9. And the show, the very opening of this episode of Picard in this flashback, dispatches Icheb with utter brutality and kind of casts him aside pretty quickly. So that establishes that, I mean, we've already known that the ex-Borg that we've seen in the show so far are looked down upon in the society, but now we also see that they are in a very particular kind of danger. So 7 is kind of forced to mercy kill Icheb here in the early going. So then the episode moves forward into the present, where the La Sirena finally arrives at Free Cloud, which is where Bruce Maddox is supposed to be. And we discover that Maddox is being held prisoner by Bjayzl, who intends to sell him to the Tal Shiar. Picard's crew plan to recover Maddox by staging a prisoner exchange with 7 as the bait, because Bjayzl wants all of the implants that are within 7. She's a very solid source for them. When Bjayzl recognizes 7, 7 drops the charade and reveals her true intention, that she wants to kill Bjayzl and avenge Icheb. Picard persuades 7 to relent, and Maddox is safely recovered and beamed to the La Sirena. Afterwards, 7 returns to Free Cloud and kills Bjayzl without Picard's knowledge. In sickbay, Maddox tells Picard what he knows about Soji and Daj, explaining that he sent them to Earth and to the Romulan artifact in order to discover the true motivation behind the ban on synthetics. Once left alone by Picard, Jurati kills Maddox, saying, "If you'd seen what I saw." Meanwhile, Rafi tries to reconnect with her estranged son, Gabriel, who's married to a Romulan woman, but is rebuffed and returns to the La Sirena. So this episode presents a rather stark contrast to the last one, and is extraordinarily eventful. I know that there is a segment of Star Trek fans that are pretty pissed about the way that it started. Not just because of the violence, which I think is an asinine complaint, frankly, but because of the dispatching of a character that was previously beloved. But so Cicero, as the person who watched Voyager most recently, what did you make of the way that this episode started, and how quickly how long did it take you to realize that it was Icheb?
I didn't realize it was Icheb until they said it when they were in the club. And then everything made sense to me. Full disclosure, I watched this episode, in two parts. One part, right before I fell asleep last night, and then the second part directly before this episode. So, directly before recording this episode. So things were a little compartmentalized, for me. But, once I did realize it, it hit. And it hit hard. So this episode as a whole was exactly what I was hoping to get from Star Trek PICARD. Like when when the show was announced, this was the type of episode, unbeknownst to me, this is what I wanted to see. Like draw from all of the stuff and to that point, Remembrance was also exactly what I wanted to see, was like to draw from the past, talk about the future, involve, show how the characters, that you knew and loved from 20 years ago, from last century, have evolved in the 40 years since we've last seen them. And like all of that has been great. And this episode was just phenomenal. I love this episode all the way to the end. Mm-hmm. It was gruesome in the beginning though. Very, very gruesome.
It was, but I mean, see, the thing that I find asinine about the complaints for violence, like people clutching their pearls when it comes to that stuff, is that, I mean, violence is a powerful tool in drama when it serves a purpose.
Yes.
And I think that this did. It really helps to punctuate exactly what these former drones can go through, because a certain type of discrimination often results in brands of terrible violence, mm-hmm. and you shouldn't shy away from that. So
Oh, no. Yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought, man. I'm sorry.
No, I did.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So I was just going to say, like, those people that say that, and I haven't dove into the weird corners of the internet that you have to get that information. But like, for those people that say that, they've got to remember something. All the Star Trek that they've witnessed and seen up until Discovery has been on broadcast television. Imagine if these were on, imagine if any of the Star Treks that you knew could have been broadcast on premium cable, because this isn't basic cable stuff. Like, the streaming service is not basic cable. This is premium cable. If we're going to draw an analog to, the television of yesteryear. If these Star Treks could have been on HBO or Cinemax or Showtime, these types of things would be things that you would have seen in those episodes. Maybe you wouldn't have gotten the level of cursing that I just bemoaned in about the previous episode, but you definitely would have gotten things that were graphically descriptive in this way. 100%. 100%. So like, those people really need to understand that the medium is helping to articulate a story in a visual way that they weren't able to do before with this franchise.
Well, and so this was also a complaint that was shared directly with Michael Chabon on Instagram. Mm-hmm. And Chabon actually wrote a rather lengthy reply criticizing the choice to portray Icheb's torture and ultimately his death. And this is what Michael Chabon says, showrunner of Star Trek PICARD. I am not unambivalent about the violence myself. The choice was not made lightly, though it was made collaboratively, and therefore with a good deal of conversation and debate among the creators. And so I assure you that it is not there simply, quote, because we can, or because we are trying, as you somewhat uncharitably put it, to be in. My partners would all have their own reasons for its presence in this story, as some of us have had our own reasons for shying away from it. For me, it came down to this. There has always been violence and even torture in Star Trek. Sometimes that violence has been implicit, sometimes explicit, according to the dictates of censorship, the nature of the situation being depicted, the aesthetic of individual creators, or technical and/or budgetary limitations. And the reason that there has always been violence in Trek is that Trek is art. And there has always been violence, implicit and explicit, in art. It belongs there. It belongs in any narrative about human beings, even human beings of the future. Violence often is the narrative, its source, its engine. The question of whether it's too much or not is ultimately a matter of taste. Personally, I come out closer to the less is more end, but that's just me. In the end, I saw how little time and space we had to convey a sense of Seven's history, post-Voyager, and the things that drive and haunt her. I decided with my partners that intensity was warranted. Seven lives outside the rational confines of the Federation because that is where she finds her sense of purpose. But life is hard out there. If it wasn't, people wouldn't need her help so badly, and she wouldn't have found such a compelling reason to carry on in spite of her history of trauma. But I hear you. I think that's a pretty solid way of putting it.
Yeah, it's a lot more eloquent than the way that I put it. And yeah, I think we said the same thing, but he said it better.
Well, he's a writer. That's what he does. Rachel, you were you didn't seem to care too much for the way that this one opened. Particularly,
I hid my face.
Yeah, you.
So I don't know about the violence. I did not watch it.
Particularly,
I did see the eyeball get cast aside, but I really do not like eye things. And
yeah,
just eyes being removed is a. I mean, I don't. There's probably nobody who's like, oh, I love eyes. Great. But I don't know, like I tend to like react to that a little bit more strongly than maybe other forms of violence for some reason. Just I don't know, like I'm like my eyes.
Did you as Shaban contends, did you get a sense of what drives Seven after seeing that?
Yes. I felt like because it was so horrifying, it really drove home her motivation. It drove home how dangerous these people are, so that we have a sense that, you know, Maddox is in danger.
Yeah.
They will like, they don't have a lot of like respect for like life or whatever. Like they're not good people. So we're like it was very effective, and I don't think it was gratuitous at all. I think probably, you know, like I mean, speaking of eye things, like isn't in Best of Both Worlds, don't you see them like doing something to Picard's eye, right?
Yeah, sure.
In First Contact, you see a needle come up and just about pierce it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't know. That could have, like... I mean, as a kid, that freaked me out just as much as this would have, so... Like, yeah, it doesn't always have to be explicit violence to be, like, horrifying.
Sure.
So, yeah, I agree with Michael Chabon. The reason I was laughing is because the word bejazzle is like really hilarious to me. It sounds like vajazzle, which is like was some sort of trend which may not have ever been real, but it was like where you apparently got like diamonds or something. Like,
I have no idea where she's going with this.
Yeah, I think I do.
Where you got like rhinestone stickers or something put by your vagina to like vajazzle it up.
Vajazzle it, yes.
Like when you got like a bikini wax or something.
Yeah. Sounds uncomfortable.
Yeah, it doesn't sound great, but like I don't know. And I feel like it was never really a thing, but for some reason, so every time I heard the word bejazzle, I just was like, and like the first time you hear it is after like there's this horrible torture, and then like Seven comes in, and like the woman who's like torturing this guy is just like, Bajazel? And I'm like, and I don't know what that word is. Like, I'm like, what did she just say?
I understand.
And so I'm like, I just went from like this, like, it was like a weird whiplash thing for me where I was like horrified and hiding my face, and then I'm like, what? Huh? And like it was weird. But so yeah, I mean, but I actually like I really like the character of Bajazel. I think that character really like fit that word, like it really like just is a good name for her.
Bajazel would vajazzle, is that what you're saying?
I think she does. Like I think she does. But I think just like her whole costuming and the work of the actress, like how they had her like sort of decked out, and just the way she did the performance, like I think that you really like I felt like I like knew that person really well, and that you know, she's horrible but she's sort of glamorous, and so yeah.
All right, well, that went all around.
Sorry, I'm meandering.
that's okay. We got room to go around in a couple of circles.
When Chris doesn't have like really pointed questions,
this is where we go. Oh man. Well, before we move on to some other segments of this episode's plot, let's talk a little bit more about Seven of Nine herself.
Sure.
This was a rather interesting look. Obviously, it's the most fully featured look that we have at a primary Voyager character after they get back from the Delta Quadrant. The only other character that we know anything about really is Janeway herself. We know that she became a member of the Admiralty, but that's about all we know about her, at least as established in continuity. Cicero, Seven of Nine, her countenance now seems very different than the last time we saw her, but it still seems like the determined core and former dronishness that she has is intact. What do you think about the way that Seven conducts herself now?
I love the performance. It rang true to me. Again, like just every aspect of this episode I loved. And as we talk about Bajazel, as Rachel brings it up now, I can't stop thinking about it that way, but
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. But Bajazel's, the performance was amazing. I was struck by her resemblance to a young Deanna Troi. You know, and maybe I was the one that was just seeing it, but it looked like the spitting image to me of Deanna Troi, a young Troi in just facially. But yeah, the performance. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But evil.
Oh yes, yeah. Like, you know, her daughter, you know, she chose the opposite. You go left, I go right. So the performance of Seven was incredibly believable. Jerry Ryan was great. I you know, like I remember reading the interviews that she had where she was talking about how the performance, the performance was. It was 7, but it's not 7, but it is 7, but it's not. And like, I thought that was, I thought it read a little pretentious to me, but I understand it better now.
Sure.
And she was right, you know? So, yeah, like the level of, familiarity that I have with, terrible with that word. But you know, just how familiar I am with that character, and being able to see her now and kind of like being able to fill in the blanks, between the last episode of Voyager and this particular episode. All of that came through in the performance and in the conversation and the short pieces of exposition. It like, okay, like I'll be happy to see her again during the course of the season, which I'm sure we will.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I would assume so. Rachel, what did you make of seeing just Seven in this episode? Because you're not someone who's absorbed a ton of Seven of Nine, but you obviously know who she is and you enjoy her as a character generally, don't you?
Yeah, I have good memories from the one time we watched Voyager.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I liked her as a character. And she was definitely recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember you had expressed concerns from the preview saying that she seemed really different. But I think in the entirety of the performance, she didn't really seem that different.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can see where the character's coming from. I like that she didn't have to wear the cat suit.
Yeah.
So that was good. I just I thought it was interesting that she was coded as queer.
Yes, yeah.
With obviously her and Bajazel were having some sort of relationship that seemed maybe beyond friendship.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to throw in there. I don't know if that was part of her character before, but I do not recall it being there.
Berman.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So that was cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just I enjoyed seeing her. She was I hope she's in more episodes.
Yeah.
I was kind of like disappointed. It seemed like this was a little bit of a one-off, and I'd like to see her come back.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I think my initial concern when seeing her, just because we only saw a couple of lines from her in the pre-release materials, I just didn't quite know what they were going for, and now I do, and it's amazing to me that she still rings true as Seven of Nine, even though she's gone through a lot as a character. And they did a really effective job again. And I think it goes to potentially the shock and awe of the violence that we saw at the beginning of it. The expository force of that violence is very palpable. Right. And you do understand where she is coming from and why she is kind of fueled by anger. I mean, there's a reason that Batman's origin story is an act of violence, right? Because you instantly know what drives him in every single story that you see. And we're getting a hint of that now with Seven of Nine. Not a character I would have thought they would apply that to, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think we all hoped that after Voyager got back to Earth, everybody would just go on to live happy lives for the remainder of their time.
Right.
A happy life really hasn't followed Seven very well. I mean, whether you want to talk about the fact that she was assimilated as a child and that she was even taunted with the drones of her parents by the Queen over the course of that show, to, a whole random other number of things that she endured that we got to see. It's a tragic story for her, and it's too bad that tragedy continues to follow her, but you can't say that it is not compelling, I think. And I hope that we haven't seen the last of her, because the thing, again, that I feel this show is doing, there is a distinct lack of hope. And I know that there are some people that are using that against the show too, except, of course, in one very, very, very pivotal key instance. And that is the man at the center of the show. I mean, he's the embodiment of that. And you even see it. I think it's really beautifully expressed with Captain Rios. because Rios puts on this exterior facade. And we see it very directly in this episode where he's trying to reason Seven out of killing Bjayzl in that instance, right?
Right.
He doesn't want Bjayzl to die, but he's presenting the information in kind of a cavalier, Han Solo-ish kind of way where he's not really that invested. But if anything, we know, first of all, that Rios is kind of starstruck by the fact that he's with Picard on a regular basis.
Right.
And
as you should be.
Exactly. And he is really kind of living up to the expectations that Picard would have for any other officer that has been under his command.
Mm-hmm.
So I have not seen anything from Rios to make me think that he is the scoundrel that he portrays himself to be at all. I see exactly the opposite. When I look at Rios, I see far more of a Will Riker than I see a Han Solo, even though he is trying to come off as a Han Solo. And in the context of Seven's character, that's the kind of just hope and devotion that Picard inspires. And you see that in different flavors in every member of the crew that's been assembled here. And the fact that, the Federation has lost its way and some of these people have strayed, they're all being brought into Picard's orbit. So people that accuse this show of being hopeless, frankly, are wrong. We're seeing a rebirth of hope just from an unexpected direction. And I kind of believe that that's going to apply to Seven by the time we're all said and done with the first season. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my read on this show so far.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong at all, Chris. I think in fact, what you've been able to articulate so masterfully is the fact that what we've seen during the course of the show so far is that the Federation is no longer the Federation. Dogs and cats are sleeping together. There is mass hysteria, but on the La Serena, there is that the name of the ship? The La Serena? Yeah. The Federation exists. And under the command of Jean-Luc Picard, as it should be, except these are Starfleet. This is Starfleet, just removed from the constraints of the rules of Starfleet. Mm-hmm. So without the laws, but with all of the morals.
Yes.
And that's what we're getting out of these characters. But there is this, it is that coupled with Lost in Space as we start to find out during the course of this episode.
Right. And the only person who seems a little askew from the morals, at least right before the very end of the show or of this episode, is Seven. Mm-hmm. And, but again, I don't think her journey is over. But let's talk about the other turn here. Right. So we get to see Bruce Maddox, who is not played by the same actor, unfortunately. But, I mean, it's casting. Who knows?
Stardust City Rag, also great title of an episode, of any episode. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. But so let's talk about so in the last episode discussion, we discussed briefly Narek maybe having a face turn, but we saw potentially a heel turn at the end of this one. So Bruce Maddox, he's basically serving as a plot function. Right. And once his function is finished, he's murdered by Agnes Jurati. What?
That is also his girlfriend, apparently.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You guys called that. I mean,
oh, sure. I mean,
props to you guys.
They kind of laid the seeds for something with her, but I even said it in the moment. Okay, I expected her to do something, but I didn't expect her to kill somebody.
Yeah, it was intense.
She ain't done killing, but it definitely was intense.
So I guess my question to you guys is, did you see a heel turn of this extent coming for Dr. Girardi, or was the extent as surprising to you guys as it was to me?
Yes, it was surprising. I thought she was going to feed information back to Admiral Sunglasses.
Commodore O.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
No, that should Admiral Sunglasses.
I thought she was gonna like tell on them or feed some sort of information or do something like that in that vein of like spying or something. I was not anticipating murder, especially since she's sort of like doesn't know what's going on ever in the whole like she doesn't know how to like use the comm system
or the transporter
terms or the transporter, and the EMH is trying to diagnose her with anxiety or something because she's about to kill someone. Which fair. Maybe the EMH should be able to interfere in that situation. I don't know. But so
maybe on a starship he would have been able to.
That
aside, it was just like
EMH.
I really don't like. I mean, I like the character. I like what they're doing with it, but like I don't like her as a person. Like I'm like, like I'm pretty like disgusted with her. So I guess they're doing a good job in that respect.
I guess so.
Yeah. Because I'm like, just at least be like a competent villain, right? Like,
she can't even kill someone correctly, or at least quickly.
Yeah.
Cicero, what did you make of Dr. Girardi murdering Bruce Maddox?
Well, I knew that she had to, because there was so much information she was keeping from the rest of the crew. And up until that point, narratively, there was no reason for her not to. There was nothing amongst the crew that led you to believe that she shouldn't trust them implicitly. So therefore, the fact that she was automatically hiding, like she presented Bruce Maddox as a person she heard of to PICARD from the jump. So from the moment they met each other, there was deception going on. So she, and you guys were right, like that she had an ulterior motive. And once I saw that she had a relationship with Maddox, I knew that she was a no good Nick. Like I knew she was going to have to kill Maddox. But I didn't think she would do it as brutally as she did, especially since I think this was like, maybe it turns out she's just a killer. But like, I didn't think that it would be that gruesome. In retrospect, I'm thinking about when she murdered, when she killed the Romulan in Chateau Picard. That she just, she exclaimed that I just killed a guy for you, but she wasn't necessarily that affected by it.
Next to Seven, she's got the biggest body count so far.
Yeah. So, I think we're going to find out more about this character, and that we're going to find out like she's been beyond despicable all along, like the calls coming from inside the house.
I mean, I don't see any reason to disagree with you. I gotta say, I mean, it's masterful casting. Alison Pill is an actress that I had seen before in The Newsroom, Alan Sorkin show on HBO.
Very, very underrated. Please watch that show immediately.
Yeah, it's a great show. I love that show.
I don't like it.
Oh.
Why don't you like it? Never mind. No. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that right now.
Stay tuned for our extra show.
Yeah,
our after.
Stay tuned for newsroom debrief. But regardless, Alison Pill is very good in that show, and a very different kind of character, though. And she shows a lot of versatility playing Dr. Girardi. And there is a particular brand of, I guess, detached menace that you kind of alluded to, Rachel, where, yeah, she is. I mean, does she elicit sympathy when she's doing murder through tear-stained eyes? No, I don't think so.
No. Don't murder him.
Right. But there's something that's almost like irritating about how she goes about her menace that I find interesting, especially when we know, maybe it's because we know that she's endearing herself to the rest of the crew. Maybe that's where it comes from. But either way.
You know what, though? I like her jumpsuit in this episode. Like, I think if I was in space, I would probably wear a jumpsuit like that. The costume design in this show, I like it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know who's doing it. Is it the same woman who did Discovery?
I actually don't know that off the top of my head.
I don't know, but whoever it is, they're really killing it for me.
Yeah. Great.
Well, yeah, and you know what? I think that's something worth talking about is the fact that, like you said about the previous episode, where this was the first episode in television Star Trek series Star Trek where there were no Starfleet uniforms in an episode. There's so much about this show that's important because it fills in the gaps of what it's like to be a civilian in the 24th century. And that's, that is something that great sci-fi does. And Star Trek has always been great sci-fi, but it's always been great sci-fi with a purpose. And now part of the purpose is to flesh out the world. And we're getting to see that in a way that makes sense. Like everybody's outfit makes sense as opposed to, a
cat suit.
Yeah. Like either the cat suit or a foil, poncho, it really shows that they thought about what people would be wearing. And I really appreciate that.
Let me wind this down by just referencing a couple of specific character moments that I really appreciated between Picard and Seven of Nine. He tries to talk her out of revenge, and sometimes those sort of moralistic speeches about how revenge does not serve the ultimate goal can fall flat. It doesn't from Picard because we know that we've seen him in the exact same mental position that Seven is in this episode, in First Contact specifically, because he is going around murdering Borg drones and he wants to destroy the Enterprise with the Borg still on board to get back at them. So he has felt that same kind of brand of rage, but ultimately reasoned his way out of it eventually. He was able to let go. I mean, he kind of did in TNG when he met Hugh, but when it came roaring back in First Contact, that was a key element of the plot for him to overcome. So I liked that. And of course, the last little moment between Seven before she actually goes back to kill Bjayzl, and it's an interesting way of sort of framing that, where she didn't want to disillusion Picard before she just went back to get her revenge because she was unconvinced by him. But they actually bond briefly over the fact that they were both former Borg drones. And, Picard doesn't really have the visual scars to show that he was Locutus at one point, but obviously that is a shared component of experience that they both have. And Seven asks Picard if he ever regained his humanity after he left the collective, and he says yes. But when Seven asks if he had regained all of it, he said no. but we're both working on it, aren't we? And Seven says, every damn day of my life. I just thought that was a nice moment, especially considering that that's an interaction that I wanted to see for a long time and never got to see in live action. There was a pretty decent comic book story that featured both of them together, but either way, I just thought that was cool. Continuity moments. So this is also from the episode's Memory Alpha page. Despite being mentioned in 3 previous episodes of the series, this is the first one to feature Bruce Maddox. His only prior appearance was in Measure of a Man, of course. This episode also marks the death of Icheb. As Icheb is harvested for Borg parts, the operator wonders where his cortical node is. In Imperfection, an episode of Voyager, Icheb donated this crucial implant to Seven. So that's why they couldn't find the cortical node, because he gave it to Seven to save her life. And Icheb continued his Starfleet Academy training after he arrived on Earth and served as a lieutenant on the USS Coleman by 2386. And we, of course, got to see the beginning of his time as a Starfleet cadet while he was still on Voyager under the tutelage of the crew. Signs for Mr. Mott's Hair Emporium. Dabo Tales and Orion Slave Girls are present on Free Cloud. And we also get a mention of Quark in this episode. So we know that Quark is still around. Rios mentions having worked with Quark and dealing with the Breen in the past. So it might have been, I mean, he might have made that up as part of his backstory, but hey, Quark was the first person he thought of. So thought that was kind of cool. Still no mention of Rom, though. At the end of the conversation between Seven and Picard, at the end of the episode, immediately after Seven says, every damn day of my life, a very short, slight piece of the Voyager theme music plays. It's very subtle, but it's definitely in there. I thought that was a nice touch. The Tranya beverage that Bjayzl offers to Maddox used to be the favorite drink of Baylock. So that's a TOS reference. That goes all the way back to the Corbomite maneuver. And it was also in an episode of Deep Space Nine. And I think that about covers it. Final thoughts, you guys, on Stardust City Rag, Free Cloud, the action scenes, the pacing of the episode. Rachel, what are your last thoughts on this episode?
I think it was my favorite episode so far.
Okay.
I definitely felt the most engaged in it. I was happy with the pace. Mm-hmm. Although I'm fine with the slower pace as well, but I liked the action. Like Seven. I was very happy with it. Mm-hmm. And I like the crazy costumes. Oh,
one thing I should ask you about, and I'll just throw this whole talking point to you. We learned quite a bit about Raffi in this episode. I failed to mention that. Yeah. What did you make of that element of her character, especially her history with her son?
That was really sad. That he was like, she must have really hurt him, because he was very very closed off and very unwilling to hear her out. Mm-hmm. And that was just sad for everybody, I think.
Does it endear you to her?
It explains to me more of her character, that she got so deep in this that she kind of neglected her family to some extent.
They're looking at her like she's part of QAnon.
Yeah, and was also, I mean, she seemed like she had some substance abuse.
Yeah.
So, I think it fills in kind of more about who she is that she's very troubled. Mm-hmm. So
pretty badass grandma, though.
Yeah.
She vapes.
Vaping grandma.
Vaping grandma. No, none of our babies' grandmas vape.
Nope, thankfully. But good so far. Yeah. Cicero, final thoughts on the episode? Any thoughts on Raffi you want to share? Maybe anything I failed to mention?
So the thing that I was going to do with my final thoughts was dedicated all to Raffi and her character. In the previous episode of Debrief, I talked about her demons and how the working with Picard, working with JL, helped her keep her demons at bay. That was something, I think that was something that she revealed, I'm assuming, to Jean-Luc, and that created an extra level of intimacy between the two of them. And you kind of felt that, seeing her say her goodbyes to Picard before she beamed down to the planet was heart-wrenching. Because you could feel what a great performance by Michelle Hurd. Because you could feel the longing, the want to stay, but knowing that she had obligations that she had to take care of, that we got to understand when she went to go see her son. And then to see, her reservation and elation in seeing her son and having a conversation and trying to understand, or trying to bridge that gap, that emotional gap that's clearly there, and her understanding and her willingness to accept the fact that the reason that chasm exists is because of things that she has done, whether deserved or not. It's again kind of like Picard with the Romulans, that it doesn't matter whether she did it intentionally or if it was just a happenstance. It was just a casualty to what was going on. It did not matter to the person she cared about. The fact is that she failed them. And part of that probably has to do with, it sounds like, some substance abuse, some of the demons that she had. The other part of it probably had to do somewhat with the duty that she had to the Romulans, to Romulus, to the promise that she and Picard made. And watching all of that kind of fall apart, and her having to deal with the fact that her son is justified, even, much to her dismay, justified in shunning her and kicking her out of his life when he is about to provide the greatest gift, another child, the furthering of her gene pool, to the world, and she can't be a part of that. It's heart-wrenching. But again, she is comforted even through the door by Picard, and so we'll be able to see that relationship blossom. Like Rachel, this was my favorite episode, if you couldn't tell.
Yeah. Sure. No, I mean, Raffi is quickly becoming one of my favorite characters on this show. I'm really interested in the journey that she goes on, and even the expanded universe material, as limited as it is so far, it leverages her character in really interesting ways. So, if you haven't read the Picard Countdown tie-in comic book series or the Last Best Hope novel, I absolutely recommend both of them. Just good information, and it shows how resilient a character she is. Only final thought that I have is that eye patch Jean-Luc and that preposterous French accent that he put on was absolute joy, and I look forward to seeing pictures of that cosplay out of Las Vegas, as well as sort of pimp style Captain Rios. Looking forward to that. And shout out to actor Dominic Burgess, who valiantly played Mr. Vup in this episode. Yes. Mr. Vup was a memorable guy, and I think he's dead now, isn't he? Or no, he's still alive. Maybe
he got shot in the back.
Did he get shot?
Yeah.
Oh well, all right, Mr. Vup.
Yeah.
We will. Maybe he's just stunned.
Well,
doubtful.
Either way, we will always remember Mr. Vup.
Rio shot first.
Well, we've come to the end of episode 50, you guys. We've done 50 of these. That's insane. But thank you guys, of course, for sticking with the show and being a part of it. I really appreciate it. And of course, to every listener out there who has given us a chance, we're really gratified that you want us to be a part of your journey in experiencing new Star Trek. But that is going to do it for episode number 50 of Discovery Debrief. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please like and follow us on our social media channels. And if you'd be so kind, we'd also appreciate it if you wrote a review for the show on iTunes or Facebook. It only takes a minute, and we'll be happy to read your review on the air when it's posted. If you have any questions, you can follow the show on Twitter at DSC Debrief, where you can also find all of our individual Twitter handles. And feel free to send us questions through Twitter, our Facebook like page, or by emailing us at hailingfrequencies@discoverydebrief.com. Please be sure to set your courses for this feed as we get together next time to discuss Star Trek Picard Episode 6, titled The Impossible Box. But until then, until we meet again, please go boldly, my friends.